No, we'll start the talk then. See, okay, let's just do this. Okay, so the I'll just tell you a bit about myself. I hope everyone can hear me.
Yeah, you are audible.
Yeah, so I'll just tell you a bit about myself. So I'm Ritik, and I've been working as a software engineer at a fintech startup called Finbox. It's based out of Bangalore, and I've been working with React, and our company uses React for the front end, most of our products, and on the back end we use Python, Rust, a little bit of R for machine learning, and Node.js is used. I mean, backend is very varied, and we use a lot of things in the backend. Yeah, so today I'll be teaching you about some of the React hooks and how to write custom hooks and some mistakes see regularly while reviewing code at my company. Again, this is just the overview. So first we'll be talking about use ref. Then we have use memo and use callback. These three are the um, inbuilt hooks that you use for mostly for performance gains, but there are other uses as well. And we'll learn a little bit about how to write a custom React hook. And like it might sound complicated, but custom React hooks are like one of the most useful things in React. And then we have state management. There are a few strategies for managing complex state across your application. So I'll just be giving you a few libraries which can be used to do this, but I don't think I'll go deeply into how to use all of these things because I believe that is something you have to figure out on your own based on your project and your use cases. And again, we have some React anti-patterns. So these are the mistakes I see commonly there while I am reviewing front-end code at our organization. Again, so use ref. So it is used to store data or store variables just like use state. Okay? And the difference is it does not cause a re-render. So you have learned about use state and you have a state setter returned by the use state. So whenever you set the state, React will re-render that component. So that doesn't happen with useRef. And the thing is, it's not just like you give it an initial value and it's not returning just the value, it's returning an object that contains this value. We'll see code in a while, but I'm just talking about this. Yeah, and it is mutable. So what does this mean? So this means that you can change the value directly without going through a setter or without having any other issues. So if you remember from useState, if you have a object or if you have a state value, you cannot just do state equals something because that React does not allow you to do that. There are cases that you can do that, but that will cause other issues with rendering and you'll not be seeing what you expect to see. Yeah, and why do you need to use this? So you need to use this when you want to persist values across renders. So what does this mean exactly? So let's say you have a timer on your app or your page. So thing is, you don't need to store the value of this timer in your state because you don't want it to re-render when this timer value changes. So in this is one use case where you can use useref to store the timer ID. And you need to store the ID because you might want to stop it, you might want to restart it, right? So this is like one use case, and then DOM manipulation is there. So you want to directly manipulate the HTML code, or you want to add an event listener, right? All of these things you can use refs, and there is forward ref that I'll talk about that. So I'll just show you some code with React. I'm sorry, use ref. So I'll just be doing this in code sandbox because I don't have to bother with all the setup and all. Okay, so initially we have to import. If you have any doubts or if I'm going too fast, like feel free to interrupt me because anyway there are only a few people, so don't worry about anything. Feel free to interrupt me if I'm going too fast or if something is not clear to you guys. Okay, so it's basically the same syntax as use state. So you do use ref, and like use state, you pass an initial value. So I'm just giving it 0. And okay, let's just log this and see what happens. And do ref. Okay, you can see the console here. Yeah, so you can see this object is being logged. So it has a current key and the value of 0. So this is the structure of useRef. This is what is returned by useRef. So it returns an object with the value with a key called current, and the current key will have your whatever value you passed. And so let's say you have a button here. Your button is incrementing the counter. So just do click. And that just takes a function. And I'm setting ref. So this is how you update a ref. You do ref dot current equal to whatever value you want to do. So I'll just increment it by 1. Plus 1. So you might be okay. I'll just show you the value here. So ref dot current. Just a little bit of styling. Yeah, ignore the styles for now. So if I click this, you should be expecting this to increment, right? But the thing is, it does not happen. I'll tell. So it does not happen because changing a ref does not cause a re-render. Like I told you, it's mutable and this does not cause any side effects. So it does not cause a re-render. That's why you're not seeing the updated value. So I'll show you. I'll just add one more button. I'll add a state here, a Boolean state flag and set flag. So this is, we're not directly using this, but I just want to show you something. So I'll just set it to false first. And yeah, on click of this, just set the flag to the opposite. Okay. Right. Okay, so I'm clicking this a couple of times. There's no change to this value. And if I click this set flag, you can see that it changed. So can anyone tell me why this happened? Why it changed when I click set flag? Okay, so I'll tell you. So when I'm clicking set flag, I'm just setting the state. So it changed to true. And then it changed to true. So it React causes a re-render. And when it re-renders, the current value of the ref is 7. And that was what is shown here. So that is what's happening. So the value is updated in the background, but changing a ref does not cause a re-render. And because of this, you don't see the updated value. Now I'll show you the use case of ref. So let's say you have an input. I'm just giving the ref value of the input to ref. And let's say I have a button here. Just like this, I'll click. So thing is, I want to focus the input when the button is clicked. So for that, I can do this. So I'll do ref dot current dot. So ref is a input element. So when you do this in TypeScript, so you'll have to give the type of whatever you're giving. So it would be HTML input element. you have to give this type here. So, but since we're using just JS, you don't need to give the type. But I'm just mentioning that since that is a confusing part of types. Yeah, I'm gonna do focus. So thing is, the ref dot current here is a direct reference to this input. So whatever you used to do with vanilla JS, so you used to get an element with document dot query selector or document dot get element by name and get element by ID. Whatever was returned by those functions, it's the same as this ref dot current. And that means that you have access to all these functions. You have access to style, you can set the style, you can read the attributes, all of these things are there. So now I just want to focus it, and if I click this button, you can see that the input is focused. Again, clicking the button, input is focused. This is one use case. And this is just a basic example. So the proper use case would be like, so we do this in our products. We have a model, and when the model opens, you need to, like there's a form inside a model. And when you open the model, we just use a ref to focus the first input. It is a valid use case. And yeah, so that is DOM manipulation. And the thing is, even if a state changes, the ref will be still storing that value. This is mostly useful when you're handling something that needs to keep a connection, like sockets or something like that. So when you're working with WebSockets, you can do ref equals use ref, obviously, and new WebSocket. So this, yeah, yeah, I'm missing some arguments. There should be some URL here, and yeah, there's some things missing, but yes. So on every new render, you cannot use state for this because state, yeah, I guess you can use state for this, but you don't need to use state for this because WebSockets keep changing. This is an object, this returns an object, and it keeps changing very often because whenever you get some data or whenever you get a new message, this object keeps changing, and that will cause your app to re-render unnecessarily a lot. So that's why we use refs for things like this. And this means that you can store the ref and you can just use the value between renders. And one more thing I wanted to talk about was forward ref. So the thing is, you can really pass refs like this to the built-in components or the native HTML components. So what if you were building a custom input? So I'll just write a custom input. Okay, for now, I'm not using, well, I'm not doing much with this. Let's say I just have a custom style. I want to add a border. So solid. Okay, input. Yeah, so you have the input. Right. So thing is, it does not work like, okay, I did not add the ref. So I'm adding ref here. So again, if I press this, you'll get an error because ref.current.forward, it's not a function. I mean, ref.current is basically undefined. So the problem is, if you're writing a custom component and you're passing a ref through this, so React does not pass a ref to its children, right? So there's something you have to do. So you have a function called forward ref that we can use to do this. So you first have to make it a arrow function, and then you have to wrap it with React dot forward ref. And the first argument to the render function is the props, and the second argument is the ref. So, and then you can pass the ref here. And now it should work. Okay, I'll just change this to, and yes, now it works as intended. Okay. Any doubts till now? Okay, so just to recap, ref used to store values, does not cause a re-render, values inside the ref.current key, and forward ref is used to pass refs into custom components. So it can be anything. So if you want to wrap it with a div and provide a label, to input and to close the div. So if you want to pass the ref into this will also work. But again, keep in mind that you should use a ref only in one place, because then anyway it gets overwritten. So uh, take care to use it only in one place. If you want multiple refs, use multiple. If you want references to multiple DOM nodes, use multiple refs, or make this ref an array so you can pass in multiple refs. Okay, so that is that. And yeah, we've covered this. And yeah, so best practices when coming to refs is do not read or write refs during render. So this part of your function, everything before return and from the beginning to before return, this is called the render part of your function. So this runs on every render. This part of code, this code will run on every render. This is applicable for every functional component. It runs on every render. And you should not be reading or writing, reading or modifying refs during this part. So you can do it inside an event listener. So let's say I want to do something and something is clicked. So I can do this. I can do ref dot current equal to something, whatever. This is allowed, but do not write to ref like this current equal something here. Do not do this, because React is expecting that your function body, the render part of your function is pure. So this means that provided that the input is the same, it should always be producing the same output. So if you're modifying things in the render function, you cannot guarantee that. So that's why I'm saying do not read or write refs during render. And refs are an escape hatch, as in it is kind of an anti-pattern. So you should not be using a lot of refs. Try and use it. Try and use things that React gives you in order to do things instead of relying on refs. So you want to add an event listener. Don't do ref.current.add event listener, because you can do that and it will work. Listener. This code will work, of course, but you don't have to do this. You can directly add an event listener here, or even here you can add an on-click listener. Even autocomplete is green. So you can do this. No need to rely on refs for that. Yes. And yes, use it for non-destructive actions. So do not remove the DOM node reference by your ref. So I mean, it might be easy to think that you can do document dot remove child and do ref.current. You can do this, but you should not be doing this, because then React will get confused, because it is expecting something to be there and it is not there. And I'm pretty sure it will crash. No. Okay, not doing. Yeah, so React got confused because it is trying to remove a child during the re-render, but you've already removed it like this, and then it doesn't have anything to remove, and then it is crashing. So don't remove nodes that are added by React. You can, if you're adding a node through a ref, that is okay, but don't remove things that were added by React. This is again the same thing. Do not modify DOM nodes created by React, because then React gets confused and you might run into unexpected behavior. Yeah, so this is a bit more advanced thing. So there's a hook called use imperative handle. It is a sub part of refs. So I'll just give you an example here. You don't need this. Is not there. I'll handle that later. Okay, so you have a custom input component and you have your parent component here. You have the ref. There's a ref. See, and the problem with this is, and I'm using this ref to reference my input. See, so the problem with this is, if I log the ref here, it is just a reference to the input element. This means that I can do whatever I want with this. So I'm just adding an effect because I don't want this to run on every render. And I'm doing ref.current.value. Okay, first I have to check if the ref.current is defined. So this is something you'll run into while using refs. So during the first render or just before the first render, between the time where the component is mounted but it has not rendered, your ref will be null or it will be undefined. So take care to check that either you have to check if your ref is defined like this. This is how you check for a valid value in JS, or you need to be sure that it will be defined. So you don't need this in an event listener, because when the event listener runs, you know that the component has rendered and then your ref is defined, obviously. Okay, so I'm just setting the ref.current.value to something, and you can see the input. I'll just remove the unnecessary stuff. Okay. You can I'll just increase the font size. Yeah, that didn't work. Okay, anyway, I guess you can see everything. Yeah, so you can see the value. So I'm setting whatever, but you can see the value is changed here. That is the problem with exposing a complete ref to your parent, because they have the direct access to that element and they can do whatever they want with that. So in some cases, it might be useful to restrict what you pass to your parent company. That is where use imperative handle comes in. So you do use imperative handle, and we'll just have a look at the logs. Imperative handle. I mean the docs. So basically it's a custom hook, React hook that lets you customize what is exposed as a ref. So this is the syntax. So the first one is the ref, and the second one is the create handle function. So first is the ref. So the ref is what. Um, uh, so this ref that gets passed in the component, that is what you give here. The second is a function, and what you return from this will be the what is exposed to the parent. So I'm giving a focus function here, and this will. Okay, the problem with this is now you need a new ref to pass to the component or the element. So I'm doing constant ref. Ref can be null, and I'm passing input ref to the input. So focus would be input ref dot current dot focus, and this should work exactly like it did. So yeah, so you can see this. Even if I pass the value here, it does not change here. But this, okay, this did not work. Yeah, okay. Yeah, we remove that code. Okay, anyway, let's just check the logs. Yeah, so the logs, you can see the object. It's one function is there, focus, and we'll try calling that function on the on click for the button. So yeah, the ref dot current dot focus. Yes, you can see that it works. So recap, use imperative handle. We use it to expose a ref partially to the parent. I mean, it does not have to do anything. Like you can just expose anything, whatever you want here. So you can also let's add some random function. So it's just getting to numbers and you're just returning the sum of the numbers. Yeah, there's also you can do here. I just log this here to show this. So the log dot current dot one, two, and you should be getting 3 when I see. Yeah. Then like you can do whatever you want here, but generally we tend to expose some specific things from another ref inside the child component. Again, and there is one more third argument here, that is a dependency array that is optional. So it tells it you can tell React to recompute this object when something changes. So I want to recompute it when input ref changes. Let's say a new input is added or something like that. So whenever this changes, it's like the dependency array for use effect. Whenever this changes, it will just run this function again and it will update the ref in the parent. Cool. Yeah, and coming to use memo and use callback. Just again, if you have any doubts, feel free to stop me or interrupt me. Yeah, anyway, moving to use memo and use callback. So use memo and use callback. These are performance optimizing hooks. And in my opinion, don't focus on these hooks if you are a beginner to React. I'll tell you the reason why after a bit. But I would try to focus on learning other things or writing custom hooks before you pick up use memo and use callback. Okay, so use memo, we use to cache computationally heavy values. So if you are like uh, iterating over 1,000 or 1 million rows in an array, and you have to do this on every render, you can use memo to skip some of the calculation. So you calculate it once, and you can tell React when to recompute it. And until that condition is met, React will not recompute this value. It will just use the value from the previous render. Okay, that is use memo. And use callback is used to cache functions. So it is the same as use memo, but just that it's for functions. Yeah, so the main use for use memo and callback, in my opinion, is when your values are dependencies for effects, or when your callbacks are dependencies for use effects. So in that case, you might want to wrap your functions with a use callback. Again, I'll show you a bit of code. Mm, yeah, we'll remove this. Yeah, I'll just show you how to use memo and use callback. So let's say I have a value. Let's say I have an object. I have an object. Like it's a name as with the age is 20. Okay. So I'm just showing the object here. So this is just a function that converts an object to string. I have object. Don't pay attention to the syntax right now. So it just displays as object. Okay. Okay. And let's say I have an effect. I have a use effect. I want it to run whenever this object changes. I want it to log that name is just okay. So will be object dot name. Okay. So you can see that ESLint is kind of screaming at me already. Let's just read this error message. So it says object makes the dependencies of use effect change on every render. To fix this, wrap the initialization of object in its own use memo hook. So what it's trying to tell you is, so object equality is a bit tricky in JS. The thing is, if you compare two objects, it'll become false. I can pretty sure yeah. The thing is, objects are stored as pointers or references to the memory location. So this variable does not contain this whole thing. This thing is stored in the memory, and this obj contains where it is stored. It is like pointers in C and Java. I don't think Java has pointers, but it's like pointers in C and C++. But JavaScript kind of handles the whole complex part, so you can directly access the attributes with object.name and object.age. So, but thing again, so on every render, this part of code is running, and that means that on every render, this is a new object, and this is a new object. So this dependency array is checking for this object's previous value, and because of that, every time React renders this function, this object changes, and then this will keep running. But imagine if you had some very complex thing, or you had an API call or something like that in effect. It's not a great idea to have it run on every render. So I'll just show you something. I'll just add one more state to show you this. I'll add a counter. I'll add a button to count. Okay, so you can see the log here from the effect, and if I click this, see this, you can see that the count is increasing. I don't want this group here, so I'll just add something here. Okay, so you can see the log coming. Every time I click, you can see a new log. So this is what I was talking about. So the way to solve this is wrap this with a use memo. So the syntax is, okay, I'll just copy it and show the syntax. Syntax is use memo, and then you pass in a function, and the function returns the value. Returns the value. So the variable obj has this as its value, but difference is it will not be calculated on every render. So okay, so you again, like effect, you have to pass in a dependency array when you want React to recompute this value. That is the dependency array. So let's say I have my age is the count, then you can pass count here, and then you can see that the value changes every time. But the thing is, if you don't give a dependency here properly, it does not change. Okay. Yeah. So that is about memo. And the same thing with callbacks. Use callback. I'll have a function callback. So it's just a function. Let's say it returns the string. Okay. I'm giving this as this thing dependency for effect. So again, you can see ESLint screaming at you. Again, the same error. Move dependencies of use effect change on every render. Move it inside effect callback, or you can trap it in a definition in the use callback. So one solution here is move this inside the effect. So then you can remove this, and then everything's fine. The other solution is, so you cannot do this if you are, let's say you want to call it here in a different place. Like if you want to call it anywhere outside use effect, inside the effect, anywhere outside the effect, you cannot move it to inside the effect because it's a separate scope on its own and you'll not be able to access that function outside. So this is where use callback comes in. Again, use callback is basically the same syntax, but the difference is the function you pass into this is what is getting returned. It's not like use memo. Use memo object will have the returned value. In use callback, the callback will have the function as its value. It's nothing returned. And again, same as effect and callback, we have a dependency array. Most of the time, if you give the wrong dependencies or if you're giving empty dependency array, ESLint will give you like a hint that it might be wrong. So you can just go here, click, okay, that is not wrong. So sometimes it will just suggest what should be given. So right now we can give object, and whenever the object changes, this will, the function will be redefined. Yeah, so that is about use memo and use callback. Again, best practices coming. So preemptive optimization is kind of the root of all evil. So before you start optimizing your code with use memo and use callback, take some time to measure what your actual performance right now is. And the thing is, people just start optimizing things, and at the end, we don't know whether it has actually improved any performance because use memo and use callback, they also come with their own overheads. So if you see here, whenever React re-renders, it has to check the previous value of object and the current value, and it has to check if something changed. So that check is an overhead. Again, same with the count here. It has to check on every render whether the previous count is changed, and that is an overhead you're adding to your code. So in this case, it's not necessary to use memo here. If the effect was not there, you should not be using use memo here because it's just a simple object. It does not take a lot of resources to assign an object or create an object. So you should not be using memo here ideally. But again, measure your performance before you start optimizing because you'll not know whether you have decreased performance or not. And again, over optimization does lead to a drop in performance. So do be careful with that. And yes, custom hooks. These are like one of my favorite things in React. So custom hooks, the why is simple, you can reuse code. So that was a major problem when functional components were introduced. And to an extent, it was a problem in class components as well. Because you'll have to write the same code over and over again. And reuse of code was very low in the initial times of React. So that's why custom hooks were introduced. So you can reuse code, you can organize things. And the main thing is the rules of hooks still apply to this custom hooks as well. So if you don't remember the rules of hooks there, you can only call the hook in the top level of your functional component. That means you cannot call them in loops, you cannot call them inside if conditions or else blocks. You cannot call them inside event handlers. It needs to be on the top level of your function. And the second rule was you can only call them inside functional components or custom hooks. So uh, hooks can be called inside hooks, or they need to be called inside functional components. Do not call them anywhere else. So we'll just do a custom hook to do API calls. I'll just add a new sandbox. I'll just share the links of all these sandboxes out when we are done. Okay, so for this, I'll be using this dummy placeholder API. So if you go here, if I go to one, it'll just give me a dummy data for the user. I'll just copy this. I'll just paste it here. Okay, let's store this in URL. Okay, so I'll be using a library called Axios to make the API call. Uh, Basically, no reason. It's just a convenience sake. So again, I import React and I import Axios. Okay, so this is basically how you do a custom hook. So you write, it's basically what a custom hook is. It is just a function. So, but the thing is, it has to start with use. That is the rule of React. Your custom hook should start with hook. So I'll do use fetch to fetch data. And like a regular function, it can have anything. So I'll just get the URL as a argument to the function. And I'll write an effect. So inside the effect, I will fetch the, so, okay. Okay, I'll just make a function that actually does this. Fetcher, so it's a function. And it, okay, let's make it an async function. And let's do response equals we okay, and we returned. Okay, let's not return data. Okay, well, I guess we can return data. Okay, and I am returning whatever fetcher is returned. Okay, and I'll get the data here, const data equals use fetch. I can do this and this works. So like this thing works, but it does not work in a way you think it does. Stringify data. Yeah. So thing is, oh right, I forgot to pass the. Yeah, see. So thing is, it's an empty. I know that the API call is happening, but you're not getting the data. The thing is, React does not know when to re-render. So ideally, it should be re-rendering when the data is fetched from this API, but React doesn't know when to re-render. So to solve that, we'll add a state inside this and do const data, set data. Let's use state and let that be empty initially. And instead of returning responsive data, we'll set data to this. And Okay, now the problem is you cannot call it like this, because every time the React renders this, it will set the state, and then when it set the state, it has to re-render again, and then it will go in an infinite loop. So do not call a function that sets data inside your function body. So we'll deal with the return later. So I'm adding an effect because I only want to call this API once, right? And I'm doing fetch, calling the function. And ESLint is telling me to put this in dependency. I mean, I'm not bothering with that right now. It's not a big deal. But solution is wrap this with a use callback and put fetcher in this dependency. Again, not needed right now. And we'll return data. And you can see that it is working. Just wrap this with free so that it is formatted properly. Yeah. So again, you can see that we are fetching the data and we're showing the data. So the neat part is when you're writing a different component, you can just use fetch with a different URL to get the data. So let's say, or again, if you want to use the same thing in the same component, but okay, I'll just move this. And I want to show both of these. And again, we don't have to write this whole code every time we want to do this. We can just use usefetch and URL. That is the neat part of this. And this is a very simple hook. So, I mean, mostly when you do this, you will want to know if this is loading. So I can have a loading state set is loading. Then state would be false. And before I fetch it, I'll set it to true. And after it's done loading, I'll set it to false. And I'll remove this for now. And I can just do this check is okay. Then then you have to expose this to the parent. So this is how you usually do it. You return an object with the two things, so data and is loading, and then you access it here. So you can access it with the same keys, data and is loading. And if is loading is true, then you just print loading double dot. If not, do this. So you can see that the loading text came, and then you see the data. So like imagine this, but you have to write this every time you want to fetch something. That is the like use of hooks or use of custom hooks. Now you just need a single line to implement this functionality. That is about custom hooks. And again, try and use custom hooks, try and learn more about custom hooks because it's a very useful part of your React development. And it is a very necessary part. So if you're giving interviews in React, I mean, I take interviews, and most of the time, one of the questions I ask is, can you write a custom hook to do something? Or so one question I ask is, can you write a custom hook to handle an array state? So the problem with an array state is, if I have an array const array and set array, you are using a use state. So the thing is, when you want to set the state, let's say you want to push to the array, you cannot do array dot push. You cannot do this because, like we said, React state it's not mutable. I mean, React will not throw an error if you do this, but you'll not see the data. So I can do this on 2, 3, 5, and let's get rid of this. Mm, So you can see the array, but and I'm calling push here. So then, see, so what is happening is, it did, okay, I'll refresh this. So every time it renders, it is pushing to the array, but the thing is, it will not work as you expect it to be. But if I add a button to push to the array, that will not work because pushing directly to this array does not cause a re-render. Remove this. Yeah, so it's just 1.6. And if I'm adding a button to push to the array, it will not cause a re-render and you'll be seeing the old data. That is because you are not using set array and you're just directly modifying this array. And that is something you should not be doing in React. So the proper way to push to an array is set array, and you get the previous value of the array, and then you return a new array that is you create from spreading the old array, and then you add the new value. And then we have a infinite render because I'm setting the state inside render. This is how you set or you push to an array. And removing from an array is a little bit more complicated. So you have to make a copy of the array. And then you have to splice. Let's say I want to delete the first element. This is how you remove an element from the array, and then you have to return it. So imagine having to do this every time you have to deal with an array. And coming to organizational code, you'll have to deal with arrays a lot. So instead of having to do this every time you want an array, you make a custom state called use array, and then you do all this inside that hook, and then you just use array every time you need to deal with arrays. So let's move this. I want to share this with you guys, so I'm just yeah. Three. Oh, yeah. Oh, okay, that's it. I'll share this after the call. So that's it about custom links. And state management. This is kind of an important topic in React, but it depends on how big your project is, or it depends on what you're using it for. So I'll just talk about 4 different state management libraries. I'll just talk about it a little bit. I'll not be showing you code, but these titles are links to the documentation for all of these. So you can check it out yourself. And again, I'll share the PPT after the call. Yeah, so coming first thing is context. So thing with context is that it's built into React and it's not very complicated, but at the same time, it's not very efficient. And it's very easy to pick up and it's very easy to add to a project. The problem with this is that whenever you change a context, and if your context is an object, because most times it will be an object, and you're changing the object, then that will cause all of the children that use the context to re-render. And that is, I mean, in a big project, that will cause a lot of unnecessary renders. And that can lead to a drop in performance. Again, I'll just go through some code with React, the context. Yeah, so this is how you provide a context. So you have a theme context or provider, and this is the value. So this value can be accessed from any child component under this context. And then consuming a context is like, so you do use context hook and the context, and you'll have the value here. So most of the time this will be an object. And the problem with that is anytime this changes, this component re-renders, and any component that uses this same context will also re-render. So that is causing a lot of unnecessary re-renders. And unnecessary re-renders is the most common performance issue that you will run into while using React. And it's not just a problem with React, it is a problem with most front-end frameworks. Reducing unnecessary re-renders is a big thing. And the second one is Redux. Redux is a very popular one and it is a very old library. But the problem with this is it has a lot of boilerplate code. You need to write a lot of code to manage 2 states or 3 states. And that makes it not very suitable for small projects. And even for larger projects, it is a lot of code you have to write to manage a couple of state variables. So that is not something I prefer, but I see the values and I know that it is a good library, but not something I would pick for my hobby projects. When for a professional setting, it's okay, but not something I'd pick for my personal projects. And Sustain is a new library. It has a more reactive approach and it has very little boilerplate, but you have to write some code to manage state. And problem is, I'll just show you the documentation. So first you create a store. So this will be like your uh, where you store the state, and then you listen to your variable or your state with useStore. So useStore takes a function and it returns a value, and so this state refers to this object, and you're just listening to state.beers in this beer counter. So thing is, this beer counter will re-render only when beers changes. Right. If any of these two things change, this does not have to re-render. So that is one positive, and even at my organization, we are trying to move to Sustain. But again, it depends on your project and what you're trying to do. And this is React Query. So React Query is not a state management library, but it is a data fetching library. So again, at my organization, we have moved to React Query, and I have to say it's one of my favorite libraries. It makes a lot of things very easy for you. Again, it's not strictly a state management library. It's suited for if you have a lot of server-side state, as in you're fetching some data from your backend and you're showing it, like in dashboards. You'll be showing tables, you'll be showing lists, you'll be showing some analytics, all of those things. And all of these data would be coming from your backend. So you'll have like very little state on your front-end side. And even the state you have will be, you'll have to keep it in sync with your backend code or backend data. That is where React Query shines. Again, you have the documentation here, you can check it out. So the main pro of React Query is that it will handle fetching data, caching, refetching, invalidating the cache, all of these things it can handle on its own. And that is a very huge plus for me. And like I said, I have moved to React Query in our organization, and it has been a very useful library. And yeah, moving to the last part. So if does anyone have any questions till now? Assuming not. And again, so these are some common things I've seen while reviewing code or while looking at my juniors' codes. So this is the main thing. So do you actually need an effect? So use effect has been provided so that you can keep your code in sync with some external things, right? So, but people tend to use it as like an event listener, or let's say you want to run something when something changes. People tend to use it like this, but that is not a good practice. And that is not an efficient practice. And I'll show you some examples, but I'll just talk about what are these cases. So effects, again, use effect should be used for things that are outside React. Let's say you want to track analytics, like you want to track things on Google Analytics or Mixpanel or some analytics library you're using. Call those libraries in use effect. That is something use effect is meant to do. Or you want to get some data when the page loads. Yes, use effect for that. These are things that use effect is meant to be used for. Don't do this. So you have derived state. Derived state itself is a problem. But that is again a different story. But if you have a state that depends on some other state, and you're using use effect to detect when the first state changes, and then you're setting the second state, that is not a good practice. Do not use it for transforming data. So let's say you're getting an array, and you're transforming it into an object. You might be tempted to put this in an effect and give the original data variable as the dependency, but it's not necessary. Don't do this. Again, this is one big thing. Do not use effect to handle user events. So a user clicks on something, and you set some variable, and you're using this variable as the dependency of a effect, and then you're doing something in the effect. Don't do this. Well, they're called user events. Use event handlers for handling events. That's why they're called events. So if you are doing something when a user does something, use event handlers to handle that. Yeah, so I'll just show you some code about bad use effect practices. So yeah, this is a simple application. You have two inputs, and then you can see the full name here. Simple thing, small app, simple app. So we'll just look through the code. So we have three states: first name, last name, full name. And then in the effect, you have your first name and last name as the dependency, and you're setting the full name, first name plus space plus last name. And then again, a JSX is straightforward. Two inputs, div with the full name. Simple. So I'll tell you the problem here. So initially it runs set state, defining three states, all of them are set to empty string. Fine. Then so the effect does not run right now. So I hope you guys know this, but the effect runs after the rendering is complete. So the control flow would be this runs, effect does not run, but React tracks that there is an effect that needs to run after rendering. It renders the whole component or the JSX, then it comes back here and it'll run this. Right. So the problem is, if completed a render and then you are setting state, and then you set the state, and state is set. So state is set, that means you have to re-render again. I mean, React has to re-render this whole thing again. So again, this runs. If it does not run, this runs. It will update it here, and done. So checks if any of these two have changed. It does not. And yeah, so effect does not run. Now I type something here, and this means that this set first name is called, and first name is set to this, and again we have a problem. So first name is set, that means state changed. Again, re-render happens, and re-render happens, and then this whole thing happens. Input value is set. So first name changed. It will run the effect. It will set the full name, and then because it's set a state, it will cause a re-render again. So that is the problem. You are rendering once with your previous data, and then it's causing one more render because you're setting state in an effect. So the proper way to do this is, try and avoid derived states as much as you can. So again, the proper way to do this is remove the state, remove this effect, remove the state, and just set full name equals this. You don't need an effect, you don't need extra state. You can just do this. So if I type this again, we have the exact same functionality without the extra overhead. So again, so the control flow wise, it set the state, then it's setting full name. You're showing the full name here. Again, render happens. There is no effect, there is no extra state, there is no unnecessary renders. Okay. And second one is resetting state when a prop changes. And this is also, it's not as much as of a big deal as the previous one, but still I see a lot of people do this. So again, a simple app. I have a drop down here. When I select a user ID, it will fetch the data for that user. It's the same API we saw earlier, the placeholder API. And code is simple. You have a state for user ID, and you have the select drop down is there, label all of these things, and then there is user details component that actually makes the API call and set some variable, and it's just showing these details about the user. So again, recap. User ID is selected by this drop down. There is user details component. User details component, you pass the user ID as the prop, and depending on the user ID, data fetching is done. So the last part is the user ID, and it sets the state, set the data into this, and we are showing some limited information about that user. So the problem is, you might have already noticed this. So when I select a user ID, there's a long delay before the data shows up, and that is the time taken to fetch the data, but it's not ideal, right? So the problem here is, whenever the user ID changes, so again, the first time it loads, we can see a loading text, right? That is because data is not defined, or data is null. It's not yet set. And when the data is set, then we render this. So one solution for this is, whenever user ID changes, we can just set data to null. And then you see the loading every time you change this, right? But then this is not a ideal solution, because let's say you had like 10 different states or 10 different state variables. Then you'll have to do this 10 different times. That is not good, or that is not ideal. I mean, it is what, like, the problem is, then you add a new state and then you forget to reset it. That will cause issues. So the solution to this is, you can pass a key prop to the component, right? And this will cause it to unmount every time this user ID changes. So unmounting means all of the state will be reset to whatever the initial value was. Okay, so whenever the user ID changes, the key changes, and because the key changes, the data is set to null. And then because it's null, we are showing the loading. And you might have seen the key prop earlier when you were rendering through loops, or rendering over an array, or rendering over an array or a loop. So key is used to tell React that, so let's say you have a list of 100 items, and you're rendering in an array, and you're rendering over the array. So if you don't give a key, so usually the key would be something that's given by a backend, like your user ID or product ID or item ID or whatever, something. It's usually the primary key of your DB or database. And you provide a key. So if you don't give it a key, the problem is that React will have to render all of these 100 items every time, right? So in order to avoid that, we can give a key prop, and we're just telling React that as long as the key does not change, just render the same item again. So you might have 100 elements and you're just changing the 99th one or the second one. So in that case, React knows which key has changed or the element of which key has changed, and it can just figure out that these changes need to be applied to this element, and then it can just reuse the old values for the previous all the other 99 elements. And that is the major use of key, but it has like a niche use case here as well. And yeah, so there is one small problem with this, because we are forcing the consumer of our component. So user details is our component. We'll just collapse this. We're forcing the consumer of this component to provide the key. So that is not a good coding practice. So what you do is you rename this to component or something else, and then you expose another user details component, and it will take the same props. It will return user detail component, and again it takes the same props, but you can give the key here. Right. So again, it works the same way. There's a loading page, and then gets the data, and that's it. Yeah, the change is that the user of your component does not need to be bothered about whether to provide the key or not. You are already handling that inside this. And the user does not need to see this component. You'll just be by the user, I mean the consumer of this component. So you'll be making this component for someone else, right? And so this component, it handles the resetting part on its own. And that is the proper way to do this. And yeah, this is also something I've seen a lot. So it's again a very simple app. You have a button and you have a toggle. So when you click this, it'll just switch the state. It'll turn on, off, that's it. And you have a function to do this. We'll look at the parent component first. So you have a state is on and set is on. And then you have a toggle is currently whatever this is. Or if it is on or off, then you have a toggle component. And when it calls the on change, you just set whatever set is on to whatever is passed by this component. And going to the toggle component, it also has a state that tracks whether it is true or false or on or off. And ignore this for now. Toggle state is just a function that sets that just toggles the state, and there is a button that just calls this function. Again, simple component, simple use case. So just coming to the effect, again, you have an effect, and so you have the state, and whenever the state changes, you're calling the onChange function with the state. And I mean, again, you need to have the onChange here as the dependency because it is a prop, and the parent can change the onChange function, and then you should be able to properly handle that. So onChange needs to be a dependency, and whenever onChange changes, this will be called. So again, one problem here is onChange is a function and it is coming from your parent. And if it is not properly wrapped with use callback, this will run on every render, and that's not what you want. And again, we cannot do anything, but like we cannot force the parent component to wrap it with use callback, because that's not something you can enforce. And state. Again, the problem here is this on chain should be called when the user clicks the button, and that is a user event. So ideally, this you should move this from use effect, remove the effect completely, call it when the state is changed. So it should be the new state, right? Right. So again, this still has a small issue. This works exactly like you intended to. But the issue is you're managing the state here, and then you're managing this same state here as well. And that is not a good practice. Like if you see yourself, or if you find yourself trying to keep two different state variables in sync with each other, then like think about removing the state from the child component. So I remove the state from here, and I pass this on to the component. I get is on here. Instead of all this, yeah, I don't need the state, and I'll just do. So again, now it's a lot simpler. You just have to handle state here. There's no effect anywhere. There are no effects. There are no additional code. Again, works the same way. The difference is you move the state from the child to the parent component, and you basically made this a controlled component. So this means that the state of this, or the value of this toggle component, is controlled by its parent. So that's why it's called a controlled component. Again, simple if I think you're passing it as prop, and that's basically it. Very simple. And yeah, so that is all I had actually. If you have any questions, I can take them. I'll share all of these things with you. And so anyway, just read through the documentation. It is at react.dev. They've actually revamped their documentation, and it's actually very good, very elaborate, very interesting. And I would recommend you actually go through this quick start guide. And this will introduce you to a lot of concepts in React. And there's a tutorial. I highly recommend you go through this. You can, most of the things I've talked about, they also talk about all of these things. And thinking in React is also a very interesting uh, article. So it will teach you how React works and how you can build on the things that React provides for you. And then I would recommend reading through all of these articles, escape hatches. Yeah, this is what I was talking about mostly. You might not need an effect. I mean, you can see that there are a lot of things here. I've just talked about a very small sub part of this. The things I've seen a lot. And life cycle of reactive effects is a very important concept in React. So I'll just talk about that a little bit. So class components are kind of the outdated, and it's not technically outdated, it is still supported, but it is considered to be the outdated mode of writing React components. But the pro of that was it had a very clearly defined life cycle. So first the component mounts, and then it renders, and then whenever the state changes, there is an update, and then it re-renders and all that. Then after it is, I mean, when it's removed from the DOM, it will unmount. The problem with functional components is that this life cycle is not very clear to you. So you can use useEffect as a replacement for the mount function. Alexa, stop. Yeah, you can use it as a replacement of the mount function, but the problem is it runs after render. Like there are a few caveats to that, but again, life cycle of a React component is very important, and you should know how it works. I just recommend reading through all of these things, and they have like challenges towards the end. I highly recommend working through these very important concepts and very important things you learn here. Again, I mean, even if you don't do anything else, I recommend you reading through. You might not need an effect, and trying and solving all four of these things, because you'll learn how to write good React code through this. And yeah, basically this is all I had for you guys. I'll share all of these things with you. Any questions or anything? Okay, I guess not. Then we can conclude this. The organizers, do they have anything to say about? Okay, I guess not. Then I guess okay, guys. Thank you for joining, and it was nice talking to all of you.
Thank you for the session.
Yeah.
Hello. Hello, കേക്കാവോ?
Yeah. പറഞ്ഞോളൂ.
എൻ്റെ ഒരു ഷക്കീൽ എന്നാണ്. യൂണിവേഴ്സിറ്റി കോളേജ് ഓഫ് എഞ്ചിനീയറിംഗ് കാര്യവട്ടം ക്യാമ്പസിലിരുന്നാണ് ഇപ്പോഴത്തെ കറന്റ്. ഓക്കെ, അപ്പം ഫൈനലി ഇത് നമ്മളുടെ ലാസ്റ്റ് സെഷൻ ആയിരുന്നു. അപ്പം ഇതുവരെ നമ്മുടെ കൂടെ നിന്ന് എല്ലാ റിസോഴ്സ് പേഴ്സൺ ആൻഡ് പാർട്ടിസിപ്പൻസിനോടുള്ള നന്ദി എത്ര പറഞ്ഞാലും തീരില്ല. അതുപോലെ 6 സ്റ്റിംഗർ ഹബ്സിലെ എക്സിക്കോ മെമ്പേഴ്സ് ആൻഡ് ക്യാമ്പസ് ലീഡ്സ്, അതായത് ഗോകുൽ, ശ്രേയ, ജയലക്ഷ്മി, പ്രജിത്ത്, ആഷ്ന, ഇവരൊക്കെ നമുക്ക് പ്രൊവൈഡ് ചെയ്തൊരു സപ്പോർട്ടും ഹെൽപ്പും ഒക്കെ വളരെ വലുതായിരുന്നു. ആൻഡ് ഫ്യൂച്ചറിൽ നിങ്ങളുമായിട്ട് വീണ്ടും അസോസിയേറ്റ് ചെയ്യാം എന്ന് പ്രതീക്ഷിക്കുന്നു. ആൻഡ് ഈ ഒരു ബോണ്ട് ഇനിയും മെയിൻറ്റെയിൻ ചെയ്യുക. പിന്നെ ഇതുപോലെ ഡിസ്കോഡിൽ വർക്ക് ചെയ്തവരുണ്ട്, ഇവൻ നമ്മുടെ എക്സിക്കോമിൽ ഇല്ലാഞ്ഞിട്ട് പോലും നമ്മളെ ഹെൽപ്പ് ചെയ്തിട്ടുണ്ട്. അവരോടൊക്കെ ഒരുപാട് നന്ദിയുണ്ട്. ആൻഡ് അതുപോലെ ഇത്രയും ദിവസം ആങ്കറിങ് അടിപൊളിയായിട്ട് ചെയ്ത ആൽഫിന, ദേവപ്രഭ, അനുപമ, I had done a wonderful work. അതുപോലെ ഇതിനുവേണ്ടി സ്ക്രാച്ച് ടു ഇതുവരെ എല്ലാ സൈഡിലും നിന്ന് സൂര്യൻ, അർജുൻ, അദ്വൈത്, അരുൺ, അവരൊക്കെ ഡിസൈനിങ് തൊട്ട് ഔട്ട്റീച്ച് ആൻഡ് ടെക്നിക്കൽ ആൻഡ് നോൺ ടെക്നിക്കൽ എല്ലാ വർക്കും അവർ ഹാൻഡിൽ ചെയ്തിട്ടുണ്ട്. അവരോടൊക്കെ എത്ര നന്ദി പറഞ്ഞാലും മതിയല്ല. ആൻഡ് അതുപോലെ യുസിക്കയിലെ എക്സിക്കോം ഇതിനു വേണ്ടി നിന്ന എല്ലാവരും, ആൻഡ് ഇപ്പോഴും കൺസിസ്റ്റന്റ് ആയിട്ട് നിൽക്കുന്ന പാർട്ടിസിപ്പൻസ്, അവർക്ക് ഒരു സ്പെഷ്യൽ അപ്രിസിയേഷൻ കൊടുക്കണം. കാരണം ഇത്രയും 30 days അവരുടെ ഒരു കൺസിസ്റ്റൻസി കീപ്പ് ചെയ്യാന്ന് പറഞ്ഞാൽ അതൊരു വലിയ കാര്യമാണ്. ആൻഡ് ഇനി നിട്ടുന്നില്ല, വേറെ ഒന്നും പറയാനില്ല. ആൻഡ് താങ്ക് യു ഓൾ ഫോർ സപ്പോർട്ടിങ് അസ്. ആൻഡ് ഈ ഒരു ഇവന്റ് ഇത്രയും സക്സസ് ആക്കി എടുത്തതിന് എല്ലാവരോടും നന്ദി. താങ്ക് യു ഓൾ.